What are you taking, Julius? Nothing. But this gun. Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate, coming at you to complete my reviews of the Friday the 13th films. Today I'm coming at you to review Friday the 13th, Part 8. Jason Takes Manhattan. And in the trailer, the guy says, New York has a new problem, which is kind of the tagline for Jason Takes Manhattan. So, this is my least favorite. I mean, it's pretty obvious. This is my least favorite Friday the 13th movie of the 80s Friday the 13th movies. I just think it in a way, it kind of does what, it does something commendable by doing something different, but at the same time, I don't mind the same thing over and over, because even if you do the summer camp / woodsy environment, it's always a different environment every time they do it. So it really doesn't get old for me. But at this point, Paramount felt like, well, let's give it to this guy, and I guess it was this writer / director's Rob Hayden or whatever the hell his name is, that supposedly was his idea to take Jason out of Crystal Lake and thought it'd be a cool idea to put him in New York, which I gotta admit, like I say, it's at least it's doing something different. But unfortunately, the thing I love about the Friday the 13th movies is the the camp / woodsy environment. So it should be said that this is the very first, unfortunately it's kind of a bummer, but this is the very first Friday the 13th film that I saw in the theater, me and my dad, probably on July. I think it opened in like late July or something like that in 1989. Me and my dad would see it not long after it opened in the theater, and it, like I said in my review for The New Blood, we were that close to seeing that in the theater, and gosh darn it, I wish we would have. But alas, this is my least favorite Friday the 13th movie of the 80s. Is the first one I saw in the theater. So that at the time, being 12, I mean, I wasn't very picky, and at the time, for a kid, I mean, my mentality at the time was, if it's new, just because it's new, it's the best. So I mean, my idea at the time when we saw it was like, it was my favorite one at the time. It's hard for me to even say that. It's just like, but at the time I was like, oh, well, this is the most recent one, so whether it's good or not, it's the best just because it's the most recent one. That's 12-year-old idiotic mentality. Obviously, my thoughts have, shifted the exact opposite about this movie since then, because I like it, the least out of the first 8 movies. So first off the bat, when this movie starts, it lets you know, it clearly lets you know that it's basically completely changing up what's it called? Formula for Friday the 13th movies of what has come before, by basically omitting the famous, maybe not famous, but the pretty much rather unsaid rule, or not maybe rule, but thing of having the famous white on black opening credits with just, randomly appearing credits all over the screen, with the exception of, Part 3, of course. Every single Friday the 13th movie up until that point had those kind of credits. This movie opens without a pre-movie scene, and just basically shots of Manhattan, and mostly probably the Canadian doubles for Manhattan, Vancouver, wherever the hell they filmed the majority of the city stuff in this movie. But it just basically, they just shot footage from the various scenes that will end up taking place later on towards the end of the movie, and just of, drug users doing drugs, and, punks listening to radio, and just these various locations that will end up appearing later on towards the end of the movie. So this movie just shows what's supposed to be, Manhattan, or aka, New York, Manhattan / New York shots in the opening credits, with this kind of, I never liked this song. It's kind of boring, whatever you want to call it, rock song permeating the soundtrack, the opening credits. And I mean, I guess in a way it's kind of an okay way to start this movie, just showing shots of, quote unquote New York, and, places that will later on, or Jason later on will visit or whatever. But like I say, right off the bat, I mean, it's just, it's just not, you get a bad feeling right off the bat when you watch this. Like, this isn't what, we're used to. I mean, having them do pretty much the same opening credits stuff, and even the pre-credits, I think all the movies had done a pre-credits scene and stuff like that, and just by ditching, you know, those two elements, it's just like, oh no, you know, this movie is not only taking Jason out of the woods and going to New York, but it's changing so many other things about, you know, Jason movies as well. And it should also be said that this is the very first Friday the 13th movie to feature an all, you know, completely 100% Fred Moulin score. Part 7, the one that came before it, featured, basically Fred Moulin did the music, but then he also used a whole lot of cues from previous Friday the 13th movies. And I didn't know until just recently that Fred Moulin, the reason why he did the music for the like 7 and 8 is because I guess he did the music for the TV series, something I never watched or had any interest in because obviously it didn't feature Jason. But yeah, I mean, so Fred Moulin, you know, basically returns to completely score this movie with his, you know, synthesized electronic music and stuff. And unlike 7, I mean, I kind of feel like even his contributions to 7 were kind of good. I really regard the music or the score in this movie as not being particularly interesting very much. I mean, maybe a little bit here and there or whatever, but you know, in the whole, you know, not very much. You know, even though my dad and I saw this in July 1989, it probably came out on home video like in the late winter or spring of 1990. So, you know, I only saw it once in the theater, of course, and, you know, back in these days, I mean, VHS tapes were known for being, I think, more or less not copy protected. So obviously when we rented it in the spring, you know, late winter, early spring of 1990, I was able to record it and, you know, basically have Part 8 right after it came out on video to watch again, and, you know, for viewing enjoyment as a, you know, a teenager at the time. And this movie really reminds me of the spring of 1990 just because it was new on video at that time, and I just probably watched it, you know, repeatedly, you know, in the weeks after it was released and stuff like that. Why I watched it repeatedly, I don't know. I guess because it was a, you know, a Jason movie, a Friday the 13th movie, and it was the newest one, and it was probably still a little bit of that, you know, idea of like, oh, it's the most recent one. But I think even at this time, I was kind of like, you know, the more I watched it, I was probably like, even if I didn't know it, you know, consciously, I was probably well aware every time I watched it more and more that, you know, this really doesn't really cut it. This movie features, among others, in a supporting role, Gordon Curry, who was, at the time was nothing to me, of course, but then several years later would go on to be in the, you know, well, at the time, I think the Puppet Master 4 and 5 were touted as being the last ones. I think they even called Puppet Master 5, you know, around release time on VHS, the final chapter, I think. I don't know, you can probably search that online and see that VHS cover. I'm pretty sure it was like Puppet Master 5, the final chapter. And Gordon Curry was basically the star of those two movies. So, I mean, I didn't know anything about him until, you know, he didn't become more of a prominent whatever, you know, or a person that I really knew anything about until those two movies, of course. I think he's, you know, I've been meaning to review the Puppet Master movies forever. I still got to do that. But so basically, and if you look in retrospect, you know, watching this movie now and seeing the name Gordon Curry and seeing the goofy guy with the whatever the hell kind of, you know, I don't know if that like a bowl cut or whatever the hell kind of haircut he's got. He's got minimal. He's almost got like no dialogue. I think that I don't know if he actually has any. I think he's got like one line, and one time he's like shh. Shh. I think he's got one line, I can't remember exactly what it is, but he's kind of just the goofy background guy, or towards the beginning of the movie, he's like the friend, maybe the best friend of the, you know, the male lead in this movie, the guy who pairs up with Rennie, you know. But that should be said that, you know, for you Puppet Master 4 and 5 fans, this movie features a younger, you know, Gordon Curry kind of just in the background, so that's kind of fun. Having just rewatched it recently, you know, first of all, the Blu-ray is absolutely stunning, and I do like the look of the movie. I think, as I was saying, with, you know, being the shot in 1989, like for me, the mid to late 80s and early 90s, Paramount in particular, just the film stock was just so gorgeous, and the movie looks absolutely fantastic, and even better on Blu-ray. It's a really handsome looking movie. But actually, you know, having rewatched it recently, I mean, you know, the new Blu-ray collection that I got, I do like the opening scene that takes place at Crystal Lake. I think or maybe not the scene, but I like the location, like that kind of long, extended opening shot where the houseboat's just drifting as coming in the other side. Wait, No, wait, I can't, this is confusing. I think it's coming in this, it's coming in one of the sides. Yeah, it's probably that side, drifting in that side. I do like the, that shot and the kind of just the whatever the hell ramshackle kind of quote unquote cabins in the background and stuff. And it's funny to note that, being like a couple movies after part 6, it's not Forest Green, now it's just Crystal Lake again. It's just like, for the most part, the Friday 13th movies, or the first 8 or whatever, do manage to have a lot of, do follow a general consistent pattern, but there are some details like that that are just like, okay, what happened to Forest Green, but whatever. But I do like, just the atmosphere of the opening scene that does take place in and on Camp Crystal Lake with these, graduating high school students and fooling around in the houseboat or whatever. I mean, I do like that's probably like the most atmospheric scene in the movie for me, probably. And the idea of having a couple characters getting naked and making out and stuff on a houseboat is really kind of a detail that's cool and surprised that they didn't do that in a Friday the 13th movie up until this point already. But I probably pretty much almost like the opening scene the most, maybe, actually, the more I think about it. Having just rewatched this, I think it's, although Rennie is kind of cute, her character for me is kind of, humdrum or whatever. We'll get into maybe more of that later, but, it's kind of a bummer to me because, the girl, that's paired up with the guy at the beginning in the houseboat, to me is kind of one of the most attractive faces girls in the movie, and it's kind of too bad that she dies right away. I would have liked to have her been one of the more, if not even the lead character, maybe one of the more prominent, female characters that featured throughout the movie, because I think the girl in the the opening scene in the houseboat is pretty cute, but alas, she doesn't last long, and she dies in a horrible, almost laughable death, where at one point when she's saying no, it almost sounds like she's laughing, like, no, no, no. And it's just like, oh my gosh. And the one thing I will say about this movie, the kills are, in my opinion, probably the worst kills in the, if not the entire franchise as a whole, definitely the worst kills, up until this point. I mean, Part 8 for me is a lot of the worsts of the franchise, or at least up until this point, and the kills are, no exception. It's like almost like high school or middle school quality kind of kills. And just like, for example, when we see this one girl, and then the thing that Rob, the writer-director, had Kane do, where it's just like, just slowly, push the spear towards her, slowly, and then we get to that shot of the obvious fake just chest that's just going like this, and then all of a sudden she goes in really fast. It's just, oh my gosh, this movie is so weak on so many points, and the kills being a huge part of that as well. Oh my gosh. One of the most pathetic things about this movie that a lot of, that even probably the writer-director has addressed, and, fans have obviously addressed at this point, but I can't really do a review of the movie without quickly mentioning it, is the fact that in this movie the houseboat is, presumably floating on Crystal Lake, and somehow the houseboat ends up on the ocean, or some kind of same body of water that the cruise ship heading for New York takes to get to New York. And it's just like, Crystal Lake is definitely not attached to the ocean. But obviously when I first saw it being 12, I had no notion of, or didn't understand that, or didn't really care about geographics and stuff like that. So I don't think that really, I don't know, probably in the back of my mind I was probably like, what the hell, but I don't think consciously I was aware of it. But that's like probably one of the biggest frickin' just most ridiculous things about this movie, is that they're basically saying that Crystal Lake is attached to the ocean, and the houseboat on Crystal Lake manages to go float to the spot that the big boat's taken to New York, and it's just like, oh my gosh. But in a way, I mean, it's hard to think of really, any other way for it to really work. So, I mean, I don't know. There's got to be a better way than that, because that's like one of the worst ways you could possibly think of. But whatever, that's how it happens in this movie. One of the things that this movie gets, really follows the last movie entry in the movie really well, is the fact that, the continuity with, the Jason's corpse yet again being, at the bottom of Crystal Lake. What's so funny is, in Part 6, it's Crystal Lake renamed whatever, Camp Forest Green, and in 7 it's like there's no mention of a camp anywhere around, and it's just a couple of houses, and now in 8 again it's a it's a camp again, and it's just like, oh my gosh, that consistency is not very consistent, but at least they got the consistency of Jason's body being at the bottom of the lake, basically covered with this part of the dock, and actually being covered with the dock doesn't really make sense. Well, yeah, I guess Daddy kind of smashed the dock up when he came up to chain Jason and bring him down. But that's probably some of the best continuity in this movie, from 7 to 8, is that, they actually have chain kind of draped around the Jason body on the bottom of the lake, and, that part of the dock covering him and stuff. And to be honest, the notion of him, being electrocuted to life back by the houseboat anchor, jolting electricity out of the power line and having the power line basically running right under Jason. Yeah, it's contrived or whatever, but it's a lot better than the plot point of, the Crystal Lake being connected to the ocean. So, that way of bringing Jason back to life was kind of one of probably the more competent things in this movie, to be honest. And I will say that it does make sense that he's mushy and gooey and wet and stuff when he just comes out of the lake, but I can tell you, I can definitely say that I don't appreciate or like or enjoy in any way, shape, or form the fact that for basically the entire movie he remains gooey and slimy and mushy and stuff. I just think that's like kind of dumb. So I briefly mentioned the cute girl who unfortunately dies way too soon for me in this movie, and I briefly mentioned Rennie, the main character. Just like with the last entry in Part 7, this movie does kind of continue the trend of having the main character be a girl, which is fine. I'm male and I'm a heterosexual male, and it's fun to look at women and stuff. So it's kind of cool to have a the main character be a girl in this movie. It's funny because just like with the lead character of Part 7, it's like the lead girl in this movie is kind of the same thing, where she's troubled or whatever and has a troubled past and stuff, and there's this combination of her and her uncle in this movie, which I find as the movie goes on, gets to be rather tiresome. It's funny because, it's kind of the same, I actually didn't really occur to me until right now, it's the same kind of dynamic in Part 7 really, with the Tina, and it's not her uncle, but it's the Dr. Cruz. It's kind of same dynamic where you've got an evil, older guy, although it's fair to say that, Rennie's uncle isn't maybe that evil as Dr. Cruz, but he's just an asshole in his own right without necessarily even trying to be or whatever. But trying to be overprotective of Rennie, he just ends up being just an asshole and just completely smothering her. But what I wanted to say is, I don't particularly like the character of Rennie in this movie. I can't remember what I said about my thoughts on Tina. I think, because I did that review a while ago now, but I think it's fair to say that I find Tina to be much more sympathetic for some reason than Rennie. Rennie's just, although she's just as much a victim or whatever, I find Rennie to just be, more annoying. And like I say, as the movie goes on, the dramatic interplay between Rennie and her uncle just kind of becomes more and more just gets old really quick for me. So basically the premise with this movie is it's basically just about a group of high school seniors, if I'm understanding correctly, that are basically taking a graduation party tour visit to New York. Of course, we all know that Crystal Lake is located somewhere in New Jersey or whatever, so taking a trip to New York really isn't that far of a distance for them. So that's the premise of this movie. Basically, the graduating senior class is going to take a special trip to New York, and Jason, takes the houseboat from Crystal Lake to the ship to hitch a ride, basically. And of course, it's said in retrospective documentaries and interviews with the writer/director that his intention was for more, of the movie to take place in New York than ends up being in the movie. Of course, with a limited budget, of course, what ends up happening is the majority of the movie takes place on the boat, so it should really be called Jason Takes a Boat to New York, or Takes a Boat to Manhattan versus Takes Manhattan. But I remember even being 12 at the time and being, after we watched it, being very aware of the fact that, it's touted as Jason Takes Manhattan, and it's just like only the last third, or only last fourth, or maybe even less than that actually takes place in, what's said to be Manhattan. So I think that was kind of a letdown to a lot of people, to be honest. We really didn't expect the majority of the movie to take place on a boat. But, it doesn't really, to be honest, since I don't really like the city anyway. It's kind of better that way, that the majority of the movie takes place on the boat anyway, because I find the stuff that takes place after they get to quote unquote New York or Manhattan just to be extremely sleazy and just nasty. And some people might like the city shit in this movie, but to be honest, just seeing all this gutter trash and just drug heads and whatever is just not something that's particularly enjoyable to me. So I think it kind of I think the lack of budget may have helped the movie in that regard. Like, you don't need a whole hell of a lot of New York stuff anyway, so having the majority of the movie take place on the boat, I think, turned out fine. And just like the character of Chris from Friday the 13th Part 3, this character Rennie from Jason Takes Manhattan has this little, I don't know, it's almost, I don't know how I feel about it. It's kind of cool and kind of dumb, probably mostly dumb and kind of cool. This Rennie has this past or history with Jason. Basically, what we end up finding out later on towards the end of the movie is, Rennie's horrible uncle, basically her parents died in a car crash, I think, when she was younger, and I think her uncle raised her from that point on or something like that. And there was this one time in the summer, and they were actually on Crystal Lake, where he's just like, you gotta really learn to swim this year, and he basically she doesn't want to, and he basically just pushes the little girl Rennie out of the boat, and just that kind of tough love, or attempted murder, whatever you want to call it. Just try to force her to learn to swim by pushing her over the boat. And this kind of ludicrous idea that when that happened, a young boy, Jason, who was down there, grabbed her by the leg and pulled her down. And it's just like, so she's kind of got this stupid backstory, past history thing with Jason. That's kind of a notion, a plot point, that the more I think about it and talk about it out loud, this kind of seems like a middle school kid's idea that doesn't really work in the real world. Like, oh, it'd be really cool. You know how like little kids have little kid mentalities? That's what that plot point feels like to me. It's like, oh, it would be a really cool idea if there was this character who, when she was a little girl, got pulled down by Jason, who was just living. How many years did he supposed to have spent under the water? And why is he just down there? He's not like he's chained down there as a boy. And there's just so many, just inconsistencies with that idea. And throughout the whole movie, Rennie has these visions of a little boy, kind of with the sagging one eye and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think she knows exactly what these visions mean or where they're coming from until towards the end of the movie. She has this revelation or whatever after her favorite teacher, dies in a car wreck, which was actually caused by her. She basically, she's sulking so much that everyone she gets close to, she loses. Well, she was driving the car that they were all in, and she smashed it into the freaking whatever. She smashed the car up, and she's the reason her teacher died. So she shouldn't really be very sulky about that. But yeah, it's just like this character having a past history with Jason, I thought is one of the many eye roll things about this movie. There's a lot of eye roll things. Yes, this movie pretty much starts the Jason is everywhere thing, which I think it's pretty much the only movie to do it. Obviously in part 7 it became, I don't think I mentioned it in my review of the part 7, where it became kind of a laughing, an unspoken joke in that movie, where you've got victims who are running, and then you cut to a walking Jason, back to the running victims, back to a walking Jason, so that became kind of just an unsaid little bit of a just ridiculousness of that movie and fun and stuff. Well, this movie takes it one step further, where Jason can just teleport and basically be anywhere. He doesn't even need to walk. He just teleports. So it was the writer/director's way of just being, interjecting some humor into it or something, or taking the ridiculousness of the walking, catching running victims by walking in 7 even one step further. It's the most ridiculous part in this movie, with the teleporting Jason, is probably the scene, in the ballroom when the Asian girl dies. It's just like, she's just looking all over, and just Jason's appears, and he's like, from one place to another, and it's just so dumb. It should be said that, I kind of like that death. In particular, one of the best things in that movie is when that stunt girl took that, Kane Hodder threw that dead corpse down on the ground, and that was a great, the great punctuation to that kill of just like throwing that corpse on the girl. It's just so brutal throwing that girl onto the the dance room floor thing. But so that was the cool thing about that scene. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is the, I don't know, first and possibly I think pretty much only time it was just teleporting Jason, and then that happens several times throughout the movie where he's just like, but just here and there and doesn't even have to walk and he's just there. And but I think the biggest showcase of it is that dance room scene. It's just, oh man. I already said that the movie, or the kills in this movie, I regard as being just absolutely mostly stupid and just like freaking grade school level kind of kills and effects. One that I just had to mention that I think is just probably the stupidest one in the whole, well, it's hard to gauge the dumbest kill in this movie, but one of the stupidest kills in this movie is the killing of the druggies in the alley with the needle, the heroin needle or whatever the hell it is. Like, seeing him shove it in his back is fine, but then they do this insert shot of like just, and I think it's just like the girl's chest in the opening scene in the houseboat. I think I don't know if it's shaking, probably, maybe it's not shaking like that, but then you see this insert of like the front where the needle's just going like in front of his chest or body, where the needle's just it's just like, it's just so stupid. It's just like, I don't know, to do a kill with this little needle and having it coming out the other side of the chest is just, it's not gross, it's not scary, it's just stupid. Like the one emotion that comes to mind or comes to the forefront of whatever of my emotions is just one of sheer disgust of how that is so stupid. That's the emotion that comes to mind. Like that is so. Feel free to leave your thoughts on what you think what the all-time stupidest kill in this movie is. It's going to be might be like a month-long process to finally figure out what the dumbest kill in this movie is, because there's so many. Like, smashing the stupid bitch's head in the glass and grabbing the glass and stabbing her with it, and shoving the freaking hot sauna rock into the guy's stomach. And I guess to be fair, and the guitar in the head, I guess to be fair, he's doing something different, but there's a reason why there's 7 Friday the 13th that are virtually all the same, because we like that kind of stuff. But I don't know, like I say, you could say that the movie, by doing something different, is doing something good, but at the same time, if you venture too far away from what works, the tried and true formula, it's just like, oh my gosh. Feel free to mention what kills you dislike the most in this movie, and that'd be interesting to see. But I just couldn't let the review pass without mentioning how dumb that needle kill was. Jiminy Christmas. So, having just mentioned my least favorite kill in the movie, it's ironic that not long after, I'm pretty sure this kill happens after the needle one, it's kind of ironic that not long after the worst one, in my opinion, what I regard as the best kill happens, where you got this boxer who I didn't mention, just because there's no really point to mention all these characters. Is Julius, this boxer guy, high school boxer kid in the movie, is just a hot shit boxer. That's probably definitely one of the things in this movie that I think I think a lot of people regard Rob Hedden's humor as being maybe off point and not necessarily connecting or really being that great with this movie. But I think that the best scene in this movie, and the best scene / kill, is probably the boxing scene. I think the humor is dead on with this scene, and basically where Jason chases this Julius character up onto the rooftop of quote-unquote Manhattan. And basically Julius at this point is sick of running. He's going to use his boxing skills to his advantage and defeat Jason. Of course, he doesn't know he's an undead corpse that can't die. So in the scene that, is like I say, I do think that creatively it's conceived and executed pretty flawlessly, and probably the single best part of the movie in terms of just really having a nice bit of humor and really good timing, where they just spend, I don't know how long, it's not really that long, but where basically Julius is just, hitting Jason, and Jason's just playing possum and just, getting hit and moving back and, doing this and that, and, every time he gets hit but another thing, it's like dumb, he's hitting his Jason, or hitting the hockey mask, like, with his bare hands, like that's gonna be good for your hands. But every time he's hit in the face, just, you know, recovering, you know, instantly and, you know, like that or whatever. And then he hits him in the, you know, stomach and stuff. And it's funny, kind of Kane Hodder's posture when you see him hit him in the stomach. He's just like kind of hunched over and just playing whatever. And, you know, it's a scene that, I don't know, it's it's just like all of the movie. It's kind of ridiculous, but I do think that, you know, the humor, it's probably the best example of the humor in this movie, in a scene where I think it works more than it doesn't. You know, the humor works definitely more than it doesn't. And then after, you know, I think the editor did a fine job with putting enough of the, you know, the senseless, futile Julius hitting Jason in several different shots. And I love how there's like, I don't know, there's really far shots of it happening, kind of to signify just the futileness of this guy boxing, you know, punching Jason and stuff. You get this really far shot of it, I think right when it starts happening, and, you know, only to, you know, have the guy get just tired and bloody knuckles, and he's just tired, and he's like, okay, motherfucker, take your best shot, and Jason grabbing his collar and just in one swing basically, you know, decapitating the character, and the head goes swirling down into a dumpster, and the dumpster, you can see like the cord or whatever that pulls the dumpster shut, which is kind of a bummer, but his head falling in the dumpster, and it just, the lid crashing shut, only to see kind of a final shot of Jason looking down at his victim, you know, his victim's head, where it plummeted anyway, as being probably the single best scene in the movie, and definitely for me my favorite kill in the movie. I think that, as I said, I've spent way too much time talking about it, but we'll just say that I think it was conceived and executed really well. So in one of the actual only, if not only, shots in Manhattan from this movie, they actually did get to go to Times Square to do this famous shot, which is really, I like how it worked, you know, how it's done, where, you know, you see Rennie and her, I can't even remember what the, you know, Rennie's, you know, love interest, the character's name is. I can't even remember, but, you know, they thought they killed Jason in the subway or whatever, and they came out of the subway into Manhattan, and, you know, there's this cool shot of Jason stepping into frame, and where the camera comes around him, and, you know, we see all of Times Square and stuff, and it's Jason dead smack in the middle. So that's a cool little bit there. And, you know, putting him on the subway, you know, he tried to get Jason, you know, where you could get him, you know, all these different kind of New York spots as much as he could. I mean, there was the boxing scene originally, as said by the writer-director, was he wanted to do in Madison Square Garden. It's like, I don't know why you'd think you'd have access. What the hell kind of budget did you think you were going to have for this movie? Like, why do you think you're going to have access to all this stuff? So I think it's kind of funny that he, you know, he wrote so big or whatever. But yeah, the scene of, you know, the scene, the little brief scene or the shots of Jason in Times Square are pretty epic and pretty cool. Yeah. You know, even though they had a very, very, very limited time actually shooting in Manhattan, they did manage to, you know, have different, you know, things like the subway and the diner, and do all this kind of stuff, have all this kind of comedic stuff with the characters running from Jason and them kind of going through, you know, how like in James Bond movies where the chase scene will go through a, you know, a restaurant or something like that. Well, the same thing kind of happens in this movie, where for whatever reason, I don't know, I guess Jason's after Rennie because, you know, she's got this stupid history with her. They don't really make it clear why Jason's after these two people, but whatever. And one thing the crazy Ralph wannabe character says on the boat is just kind of like with Nightmare on Elm Street or Freddy's Dead or whatever, where he's just like, he briefly mentions like, you're the last or something like that. Remember how they did like the last of the Elm Street kids? The crazy Ralph wannabe guy in the boat is like, you're the last, or he says something about that to, I think, about the kids or something like that, as if they're the last. Maybe it could have said that, you know, you're the campers that were there. Like, it just makes no sense. Like, I don't know, it's just one of the things that makes even less sense. Like, why you wouldn't want to kill they're the last what? Like, I don't know. So the end of the movie is just, you know, going through various kind of New York / city-ish, you know, things as Jason's chasing Rennie and the boy, you know, the boy toy or whatever the hell you. I want to say, I don't know if it's Scott. Oh, Sean. Relinquishing command of the Lazarus to Captain Sean Robertson. That guy's dad is so funny. Like, I'm gonna try to do this. Send out the international maritime signal. Then followed by a security broadcast informing other ships that we are underway. The captain's so disappointed that his son doesn't know the protocol for the being a... like the son gives a shit about being a captain. It's so freaking funny. Anyway, I'm all over the place. So obviously the movie ends by chasing them down into the sewer, in which this one guy working down there says, "Yeah, the sewer, we better get out of here. The sewer floods up with toxic waste at midnight every night." Like, that makes any sense. The movie sounds like it was written by, a grade school kid. So, they get, Rennie and, Sean get trapped down in the frickin' sewer and try to get out, and just in time for, like, I don't know, Jason, they're climbing up a ladder, just to get out of the way of the toxic waste that floods through the sewer every night at midnight. And, of course, Jason being at the bottom of the ladder, it gets flooded with the toxic waste and flooded over, and when all the toxic waste goes down, which looks really clear for toxic waste, by the way, looks just like water. It's revealed that, throughout the course of the movie, Rennie kept having these visions of young Jason, and then when the toxic waste level goes down, it's revealed just the young Jason boy with, whatever, shorts on or boxer shorts or whatever, just laying there in the water. Like, the toxic waste washed all of the badness of Jason away, and now it's just this speck to, and that's kind of why I regard this movie as, even though Seven is my last real favorite Jason movie, that's why I kind of regard this as being more or less the last Friday the 13th movie, because it does come full circle in that regard. And it would have been kind of cool if this had just been the last one. And for many, many years there, well, it seemed like many years when I was a teenager, for a while it was the last one. And it is kind of cool if it had been the last one too, even though that plot point of, basically, young boy Jason being laying on the frickin' sewer ground is really stupid. It's kind of cool how it, does bring it full circle back to, in the beginning in a lot of ways. And even though it's stupid, there is a hint of coolness there. So I'm only going to be able, this might actually be kind of generous. I'm only going to be able to give Friday the 13th Part 8 Jason Takes Manhattan 1.5 stars out of 4 stars. And that might be kind of generous, but having rewatched it recently, it was just like, as it goes on and on and on, it's just like, wow, the more years that pass, and when I revisit this movie, it's just like, oh my gosh, like, how could I, when I was 12, ever thought this was like the best one? Of course, at that time, I, hadn't seen so many of them that many times, so, but definitely this, as the years go on, definitely becomes less and less of a, kind of like how, New Beginning over the years became more and more of something that you enjoy. This one for me, having just rewatched it again recently, is becoming probably less fun to watch every time I watch it, just because of my love for the first 7, and having Jason in his actual, spot that he belongs in, the, camp/woodsy environments and stuff. So thank you very much for watching my review of Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. And as always, we'll catch you next time.
Entertainment. Living. News. Businesses. Sports. Super Saturday. What the hell's going on? It's entertainment. Fox Entertainment. Shit. Guess we'll just have to take it apart. I think it's somewhere around here. Metro. There is none. Damn. What the fuck? Someone must have took it. this is it. This is it, I said. Fucking A it is. How about the back page? Well, it's North Country Living. What the hell? Yes. Where is it? Where is it? Come on. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There it is. Yes. Yes. New York has a new problem. Please. It's not in our drive-in. Shit. Damn it. New York has a new problem. Please. It's not in our drive-in. Shit. Damn it.
Walking corpses are not real.